I want to show you just very briefly how I will go about assigning grades to your work using a standards-based grading system. I've got as an example here a quiz, not unlike what you would take in your math class. And this particular quiz deals with the standard, seventh grade math standard for ratios and proportions, specifically dealing with unit rates. And let's just go through and grade each problem here, and then we'll put a final grade on it. Okay, our first problem, which is faster, going 20 miles in half an hour or 12 miles in 1/3 of an hour. Now, the student who's taken this has computed the rates for each one of those. 20 miles divided by 1/2, recognized that he had to change this so he can do his fraction operations. 20 divided by 1/2, change that to 20 times 2/1 using the same change flip idea, and gets 40 miles per hour. It did the same thing with the other rate, 12 miles divided by 1/3 of an hour. Rewrote it in this form so he can do his same change flip, because he knows that dividing a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, and gets 36 miles per hour, and then correctly circled 40 miles per hour as being faster. All right, the second problem, which is a better buy? A half a pound of sandwich ham for $2.25 or 3/4 of a pound for $3. Computed both of the rates. In this case, he's taking $2.25 divided by 1/3 of a pound. Now, this student recognized that 2.25 is really the same as 2 1/4. 25 cents is a quarter. So we wrote that as 2 1/4 divided by 1/3. Recognize the change to multiplication, flipped this fraction to get the reciprocal. However, when he went to change this mixed number to an improper fraction, he did that improperly. He just made that 21/4. And even though this multiplication is correct, and recognize that 15 3/4 is $15.75, this piece right here, just converting to an improper fraction, is not correct. We'll come back to what we'll do with that. Computes the other rate, $3 divided by 3/4, does everything fine. The 3 divided by 3/4, changes to multiplying by the reciprocal, does the multiplication correct, and gets $4 a pound. Now, he compares 4 to 15.75 and says, oh, this is cheaper, circles $4 a pound. Now, in the end, this is the better buy. But if we're looking to grade this student on his fraction operations, this was a minor mistake, and we'll have to come back to that to determine how we'll factor that into his grade. But let's keep going. Let's grade the rest of his quiz. His third problem. Tom's plant for his science project grew 10 inches in 3 days. Christina's grew 14.5 inches in 4 days. Which had a faster growth rate? So the student said 10 inches divided by 3 days, got 3 1/3 inches per day. 14.5 inches divided by 4 days, again, same as before. Change this so we can do multiply by the reciprocal, same change flip. He converted his mixed number to an improper fraction correctly, got the correct number, converted it back to a mixed number, and circled the correct answer. So that's 100% correct. Now this last one. On Mr. G's farm, he usually sells tomato plants for $1 each. He sells pepper plants, 3 for $2.50. Can you buy more tomato plants or pepper plants with $10? And this student said $1 divided by 3 is 1/3. $2.50 divided by $10 is 4. And then he's like, oh, I'm doing something wrong. Didn't really know how to work this problem out, and just put a big question mark. Same thing as putting IDK. So we're just going to circle this whole problem because we really didn't know how to go through this. Now, if we grade this on a traditional grading system, okay, this student got 3 out of 4 correct. Even though he had this small error here, if we ignore that, 3 out of 4, this student would get a 75 because they're 25 points apiece. Or if it's a 10-point quiz, then it's a 7.5. Either way, that's a percentage. And a 7.5 or a 75 is a C minus if we're using traditional grades. But let's look and talk about what it is we were trying to measure and assess on this quiz. The number one objective that we're trying to assess with this quiz is the ability to compute and compare unit rates. That's from the North Carolina Standard Course of Study for 7th grade, standard 7.rp.1, if you want to look it up. In almost every case, computed all of the unit rates correctly. There's a small error here with the fraction piece, but there's an understanding that I need to find a unit rate, and I've set it up correctly 3 out of 4 times in how to compute that. So from the perspective of knowing how to set up a unit rate, this student has shown proficiency. Definitely knows how to do it. A little bit of a problem down here with problem number 4, but he's not 100% perfect, but he's showing proficiency. So I would give this student easily a 3, maybe even a 3 plus, for showing that he is proficient. Now, if I look at this piece right here, a secondary objective standard that we're looking to measure here is how well does he know his fraction or arithmetic. And there's just a slight mistake here. So he's really kind of mastered that if on this particular assessment. So for this student, I would give this student a 3. Okay. This student is definitely proficient. And a 3 is a medium to high B when we start converting this to an ABC score on a report card. So there's how we would grade this particular quiz from that objective. Now let's look at what happens when it comes time to send home progress reports. And here's an example of the progress report that this student would bring home. And we'll use Johnny because Johnny always gets used for any example. Here's a progress report that would come home after, say, 2 or 3 weeks in the quarter. And you'll see that we've got all of his grades listed not according to the date in which he took them, but according to the standard. There are 5 different strands in 7th grade that we test, that we are teaching and students should be learning. And so all of Johnny's grades have been grouped according to that strand. On this progress report, we have dealt with 3 of those strands: ratios and proportions, the number system, and expressions and equations. And you see here that we've had a couple of quizzes for those. And in parentheses, I've put in here exactly which one of those standards. So if you want to go and look up the standards, you would be able to find exactly what it was that your student was supposed to be doing. And just so happens that here was the quiz grade. He had a 3. Now, as we look at all of these, and we're going to take each standard, each strand separately, let's see how well Johnny, as of this progress report, understands ratios and proportions. Well, on quizzes, he definitely was proficient on this quiz here. Was almost, didn't do too bad here, a 2 plus. He could have done better, but he had a pretty good idea. If we look at his test, on all 3 of these tests that measured one of these objectives, he was highly proficient in 2 out of 3 of those, and pretty close with that 2 plus. And if we were to quote unquote average these out, then it would probably come out to be a 3 anyway. And for me, I feel like the test should have a little bit more weight. He's shown growth. The quiz is something that you take en route to the test. And clearly, Johnny grew overall from time of taking the quizzes to time of taking the big test. And this is sort of a mid-quarter report. We're just going to say, okay, oops, Johnny, you're pretty proficient, okay? And before this progress report ever goes home, the student would have a chance to assess him or herself, and then I would conference with the student and we would put the final grade on there. So let's look down at the number system. Only got one grade, if you want to call it that, for that particular strand, and that was a 4+. So, and that's easy. Now down here in this strand, expressions and equations, we've got, it looks like 3 assessments, 3 types of grades, a 4+ on the quiz and a 3+ and a 2+ when 2 separate objectives were put on a test. Overall, for this whole strand, which is what we're trying to measure, this student is showing high proficiency, almost mastering. We'll give him a 3+. Now we want to give Johnny an overall grade. So he's got a 3, a 4+, and a 3+. Would have a conversation with Johnny. Where do you think you fall in this? How do you think you're doing overall? And I think that we could come to an agreement that Johnny at this point has almost mastered his material for his math class up to this point. And of course, what would go in Power School and then eventually go into a report card, we would take that 3+ and convert it to an appropriate number grade that fits that scale. So this is how standards-based grading will be used in our classroom.